Now, we're going to talk about Limkin's 8 techniques for genocide, right? So this is Limkin's 8 for Limkin's 8 techniques for genocide. The first technique is political. Right? The first technique is political. Limkin says the destruction of local governments, obviously, and the imposition of the national pattern of governance, right? So we're specifically going to destroy whatever local governments exist, and I'm going to impose our own local government, right? And the way that he goes about, the way that we go about doing this, there's numerous ways. Is that, well, one, you might enforce name changes, right? That's pretty basic. Another thing that you might do, he introduces the idea of fifth columns. I'll explain what that is in a second. Fifth columns. A fifth column is sort of like saboteurs, right? They sabotage a population. So imagine that I'm from city A and I'm acting as a fifth column in city B. Well, me and a bunch of guys go over to city B. We occupy city B as residents of B, as affiliated, as nationalistic to B. And then when I'm given the word by members of city A, I show my true identity as members of city A, and we overrun B to become A. This is the idea of fifth column, right? So what I do is I essentially invade, but the invasion isn't a direct invasion. I occupy, I assimilate, I blend, I'm accepted as a resident, I'm accepted as a citizen, I'm accepted as patriotic or nationalistic, when in fact what I am is I'm a fifth column. I'm awaiting orders from the motherland, the fatherland, to finally enforce the final stage of infiltration and erect this fifth column, right? This new order of governance, right? And you destroy from within, right? Instead of invading from outside, you make an invasion from within. The classic fifth column example is obviously the Trojan horse, right? You get the horse inside. Once you're inside, everybody comes out and destroys everybody else. That's the sort of canonical, prototypical example of fifth column sort of sabotage invasion. So that's what that means, right? So we have, how do we talk about political name changes? And there's several, but I'm just going through what he says in the text. Name changing, enforced name changes, fifth column activity, and special privileges to increase disunity, right? So privileges. Those Norwegians who decide to claim German identity, then you have perks A, B, C, D. Those Norwegians who do not choose to affiliate themselves with Germany, well, you do not get access to these particular perks, and so on, right? So special privileges is the last. All right. The second is social. All right. With social, social is the abolition, right? To absolve, the abolition of local law, courts, clerks, clergy, and the intelligentsia. Basically everybody, right? You're going to abolish whatever law, so abolish local law, courts, clergy, and intelligentsia. Basically academics, I'll just put academics. Right, so you're going to get rid of, in social destruction, you're going to abolish the local law, courts, clergy, you're going to get rid of all the academics, and you're going to replace these individuals with those from the oppressors group, right? So I'm going to kill all of your clerics and put in my own. I'm going to kill all of your academics and put in my own. I'm going to kill all of your clergy and put in my own, and so on and so on. Okay. Number 3 is cultural. Right. The next technique for genocide is cultural. The prohibition of native languages, right? This is important, right? So in this cultural technique, what ends up happening is the oppressor prohibits those who have been occupied from speaking their native tongue, from speaking their native language. This is huge, right? This happens quite a bit, actually, in many of the African genocides, right? It has this sort of linguistic base, ethnicity and language. It's hard to sort of decipher or pull apart clearly the two, right? So the prohibition of native languages and the imposition of the oppressor's language. But not only the oppressor's language, not even just the imposition of the oppressor's language, but also the imposition of the oppressor's educational system, specifically the indoctrination. If it's National Socialism, then obviously all that will be taught in school, in primary school, is going to be National Socialist ideology, Nazi ideology, right? What ends up happening is that everything ends up being regulated, right? So let me write some of this down. The prohibition, prohibition of native languages, the imposition, obviously, of the oppressor's language, the imposition of oppressor educational system, right? The prohibition of native language, the imposition of the oppressor's educational system, and the regulation of sort of everything pertaining to aesthetics, right? The regulation of all matters of aesthetics. Okay. So, and with respect to this, what Lincoln describes is a practice where in occupied territories, Nazi Germans would set up a system where those of the oppressed group had to assimilate, right, and claim German identity in order to be given, let's say, a card to practice playing an instrument, or you would have to get a license to practice painting, or you might have to get a license to practice some type of sort of cultural art form, right? So without this card, you can't legally practice, the piano, painting, so on and so forth, and the only way to get that card is to claim German identity, right? So those who did not claim couldn't practice, those who did claim could practice, right? So this is sort of this cultural destruction, this cultural imposition. Number 4 is economic. Basically economics affect everything, right? They're going to affect economic technique of genocide is going to affect all 7 techniques, right? Economic affects everything. If you have a destruction of the economic foundation of a targeted group, their social lives are going to be affected. Their political life is going to be affected. Their cultural life is going to be affected, and so on and so on. Obviously, what ends up happening is that anything worth any value is going to be confiscated in the name of its rightful owners, right? Its rightful heirs. It's important to recognize that there are limits to this. I'm not going to get into it now. Himmler gave a notorious speech called the Posen speech, where he castigated some of his SS men who took money from people that they had killed, exterminated Jews they had killed. And it was like, yeah, killing those Jews wasn't a problem, but we don't steal from them. We have standards, we have codes, we have ethics, right? In this very twisted, very bizarre, probably the most bizarre speech ever, right? It's pretty out there. So with respect to this economic pillaging, there are quote-unquote rules to how this pillage unfolds. It's not that every man for himself, right? Go in and just steal all you want, because this creates an air of immorality among the oppressor group, and that's the last thing that they need in attempting to convince moderates that their actions are just. But that's a little bit more complicated than an introductory discussion, so I'm not going to talk about that now.